What do a stone, Nazis, and the country of Portugal all have in common? I'll give you a hint. It involves what many know today as the Holy Grail. But it's not just some silly story from the past, nor even just a physical object. It is the most deeply occulted information on the planet that is currently shaping your present and directing your future. My name is Nathaniel Hoytmacher. I am a trained historian with a degree from the University of Santa Cruz. I was raised in a Hindu household, and I've dedicated the last 15 years to studying the various aspects of history and mythology. And through these stories, I've overcome many personal challenges and been made a better person because I learned their deeper meanings that the ancients were trying to tell us. There is a reason why these stories last hundreds of years or thousands of years, is because they touch upon timeless truth that reflect on the human condition. In order to truly understand the Grail, we must start near the end rather than its beginning, with a group of people who wanted to abuse its power for their own political gain and to make sure that their aims were guaranteed. The last in a long string of things associated with the Grail and its mysteries is one of the most darkest time periods in human history, and that is, of course, World War II. Hitler and the various different occult groups associated with the Nazis went out in search of various different occult objects. These included, of course, the Holy Grail and the Spear of Destiny, which is also very much linked to these stories having to do with the Holy Grail in and of itself. And it's quite interesting that they decided to do this. Now, the reason why they were doing this and going into search of this, as well as many other objects that were of cult thing, was because they were trying to accumulate any type of power that they could for themselves. They didn't want to just be political inside of it and only deal with this world. They were also interested in dealing with occult. They were also interested in the spirituality and stuff like that. And they were trying to usurp many traditions that had come before them and use it for their own political, racial ideologies and things that were going on of this particular notion and whatnot. And they hired someone who was specifically multiple people, in fact, that were specific experts in Grail lore and mythology in the hopes of trying to find the actual physical objects of it. Now, I'm not going to get into whether the physical cup of Christ used the Last Supper, which is known as the Holy Grail, actually exist here or not. That's not the point of this video. The point is to showcase how these stories that are associated with have much deeper meanings and that they have many ties to things that are going on with it, that they literally change the course of human history, and how these same stories can change us if we allow them to by really understanding their deeper meanings and what's going on here. So, inside of the stories, you have where the chalice, the grail that's there, is used and shows up in King Arthur's court. And during that time period, all the knights of the Round Table go out and in search of it. And this is done because of the other aspect that the Nazis were also looking for, which is the Spear of Destiny, also known as the Spear of Longius. This is the spear that supposedly, hit the side of Christ while he was on the cross and made him bleed. So by doing this, they would go and catch that, his sweat and blood, and this would be part of the Holy Grail tradition, and then it's brought over to the United Kingdom via a man named Joseph of Arimathea. We will touch on all of this and more later on. But for our purposes today, what's happening here is that in the Arthurian tradition, the spear goes and is used in a way that it's not supposed to be used for, and it causes damage to somebody else. And this is known as the Wounded King, or the Fisher King sometimes, or the Rich King. I'm going to just use as the Wounded King here for the purposes of this video. And I've already made another video on the Wounded King, so, and that trope. Now, what happens is that when he does so, the blow makes it so that way it causes destruction throughout the total destruction of the king's realm, the wounded king's realm. It leads to war and disease and to having all these problems that pop up and to crops not growing and rain not coming and all these things for what's going on with it. And so clearly the Grail, in terms of the Spear of Destiny here, has a lot of potential for that, for destruction and its power. On the other hand, the Grail in and of itself is said to be able to heal the wounded king. That makes it so that way the land can be restored properly and whatnot. This is why the knights go on their quest to seek out the Grail and whatnot. This is also why the Nazis are seeking out the Grail and the Spear of Destiny. The Spear of Destiny is to make it so that way they can control and have the outcome that they want and potentially use it as a weapon if they are able to find it. And it's also talked about the Spear of Destiny in terms of legends and myth behind it, that anybody who has it cannot be defeated in battle, which obviously, if you're in the middle of a war or preparing for a war and you want to basically take over the world and make it so that way you do that, then you're going to need that for what's going on. On the other hand, you also want to be able to find the one thing that can go out and heal what has been done by the Spear of Destiny here and make it so that way you can go and prevent the one thing that can pop up from this. Now, the Grail is also described as something that can not only give life and healing and whatnot, but it can also take it away. So that's another reason why the Nazis were going and looking for these occult objects and whatnot. And so I think before I go any further here, I'm going to just briefly describe the word of cult, because a lot of people think that it somehow has to be associated with evil. It's not. It comes from Latin. It means, and its roots are from occultare, and it just means to hide or hidden. So in other words, this is deeper hidden meanings behind stuff for it. It's like exoteric versus esoteric. Exo is the surface, like an exoskeleton, and then eso is hidden, within, deeper, and whatnot. And so you have to understand the deeper meanings of these stories in order to make it so that way you can get to them. There's a hidden message within these stories, hence the word occult, and hence why the National Socialists, the Nazis, were going and looking for these things as well. They were trying to make it so that way they could use any and all occult objects that they associated with the Aryan people, to make it so that way they could go and do this. And of course, I'm not talking about all of them here. I'm just talking about the Spear of Destiny and the Holy Grail, with my main focus being on the Holy Grail. So that's important to understand that now. Um, it's interesting enough to note that the first mention of the Holy Grail, at least in the Arthurian mythos, is actually by a person named Chrétien de Troyes, and he doesn't mention that there's one Grail. His exact wording of the Grail is a Grail, implying that there are multiple Grails. And this is the first time that you can see this being talked about in the mythologies and legends and romances associated with the Arthurian tradition. Um, and it's important to understand this, because this leads to the possibility that, the searching for a physical object is not the actual end goal of things here, and it's just not true in any way, shape, or form. And I've come to learn that there are multiple things that are associated with the Grail in my quest to understand it. and to understand other mythologies around the world and whatnot. And so this all comes into something that I've termed the Grail Sciences, hence the name of the channel, the YouTube channel. So if you want to do this very briefly, what I mean here in terms of science, it comes from the word sciere. It means to know, to understand. And it's a Latin term for what's going on there. And it's very similar to what we would mean by science today, but it doesn't just have to do with what we would necessarily consider science today. An example of this could be like a philosophy of some sort. Philosophy is a way to come to know things, even if it's not like done through the scientific method per se, and whatnot. So when I say science, that's what our science is. I'm talking about things that are associated with the Grail that we can use to come to understand it better and what it means. So that's what's going on here when I mean that. So it could be mythology, it could be philosophy, it could be actual scientific stuff with it. We're just going to be looking into all things and anything that could possibly have to do with the Grail or makes references to the Grail stories that we'll be studying here, mainly through the lens of the Arthurian tradition, but we will be pulling from other traditions that clearly showcase that they also have direct ties, to the Arthurian tradition in and of itself. Now, as I mentioned before, the Grail can be used for both good and for negative purposes and whatnot. The Grail can take life away, but it can also give it. But this is one of the things that goes on with it. It depends on the person who ends up searching for it and whether or not they are ready to receive the true meaning and understanding of the Grail. If the person who does it comes at it from a pure heart, then they will be able to get the Grail. If, on the other hand, they are not able to do so and they have ill intent behind it, or that there's something wrong with them in terms of a character flaw that's coming up, then they will have negative consequences for them seeking out the Grail inside of it. Now, when we talk about the Grail traditions and whatnot, the major components that are there are pagan and then medieval time period Christianity for what's going on, specifically in the 1100s, 1200s, and 1300s for the most part, for the Christian influence or when these stories were written down. And we also know that a lot of the original material comes from various different Celtic traditions. I put Celtic in quotation marks because there's multiple meanings to that word from a historian's standpoint for what it is. And so there are pagan aspects mixed in with the story, and there are a lot of Christian influences that are on that story. And one of the major groups that has to do with the writing of the medieval time period that ties into all of this are the Templars. They are the ones who are behind a lot of the written materials for the people that we know that actually wrote all this stuff down. Now, what I mean by that is that some people that wrote it down, we don't know who they are. They were anonymous, so we don't know who they're associated with. But a lot of it is done in such a way that we know that they were done by Cistercian monks or by the Templar Order, which are actually all one and the same group, just different branches of each other, which we'll explore later on. And they were both created and sanctioned by a man named Bernard de Clairvaux. So this is important because this is going to get us into something that's very much talking about the philosophies of a particular group of people and stuff that's going on there with it. And you might be thinking, okay, that's great that they're associated with the stories of the Grail, but what does it have to do with Portugal? Well, that I mentioned earlier in the video. Well, one of the things that they did, meaning the Templars did, is they created the nation state of Portugal on one of the ancient seals for it, the original documents for the creation of this particular country and whatnot. There's a seal that says Portugal on it, which means through you, the Grail. And so they clearly had some sort of plan for all of this that was going on there with Portugal and the Grail, and we will be exploring that further for what's going on inside of these traditions as well. And then one of my favorite things that helps ties all this together is a book by Wolfram von Aschenbach called Parsifal. And inside of it, it is explicitly mentioned that the Grail Guardians are Templars. So it flat out tells you what their beliefs are about stuff right there in terms of what Wolfram brought with it. That is, from my knowledge of all the stuff that I've read, the most occult version of the story for Parsifal and the search for the Grail. It's so occult, it's not even funny. There's so many different threads inside of it. It's very interesting for what's going on there. Regardless, the point is that also inside of that story and other ones, it is mentioned about a stone, and the stone is lapis excellius, which gives a shout out to another way of saying the philosopher's stone in alchemy. So alchemy and the stones that are there are very much a part of the Grail tradition for what's going on there, and then so you see that there's other things that are associated with this. So we've got a stone, we've got a chalice, we've got a spear. We also have a sword that's associated with this, and I'm not just talking about Excalibur or the sword and the stone, which are not the same thing, at least in most stories. I'm talking about a sword being associated with it as well that needs to be fixed with that, which another character called Gawain goes into all this. Which why I'm bringing this up is because with the sword, the stone, the chalice, and the spear, we now have not only the four main treasures of the Tuatha De Danann of the Irish people that are there with it, in terms of their stories that seem to have influence here, but we also get tarot. And inside of the tarot deck and the cards, they're broken up into these four different categories, and they all have different meanings for stuff for what's going on there. And now we have another association with the Grail sciences, if you will, that are right there, and how that all plays into this as well. And we also know that a lot of the stuff that's coming out of the Templars has to that they that and these other parts where they have control over things has to do with Kabbalah. And so Kabbalah inside of it, the tree of life, has something else that is literally referred to, part of the shape of it that's there that makes up that is called the Grail. So we're starting to see already just by these basic connections that are there with it that it's tied to a lot of different things with it. You've got Irish mythology that's in there. You've got Celtic mythology that's in there. You've got stuff from Wales that's in there for what's going on. You've got Templarism that's in there. You've got Christianity, so that's Catholicism that's in there at this time period. You have the tarot. You've got alchemy for what's happening with it. We already know that this is also influenced by certain aspects of uh, Islam to a certain extent, lesser extent than these other ones, but they're still there that are playing out with it. You're going to see that there's just tied to so many other things that are going on there. And of course, you know, as someone who's raised in a Hindu household, I also see that there's connections to the Vedic tradition that's there. And when you get the Vedic tradition for what's going on, and you realize that you have the Celtic, the Irish, and then you have other parts of it that are going on there, you see these same things pop up. And of course, these over what's a group of people that originated from the Caucasus region and whatnot, you get the Proto-Indo-Europeans and their spread. And this makes it so that way you can also see them and all the stuff that goes along with that, where there's certain portions of things that occur uh, there. You know, you also have heard, of course, from certain conspiracy aspects of things with it that there's a bloodline that's associated with this with it, and so this gives us, uh, certain parts of the Merovingian dynasty that's there with it, and that the going back to ancient Egypt and Sumeria for what's going on there. And since we're on the Sumerian topic, they have a science that's there that they called GRA dot AL, Graal, Graal, which is probably the oldest variant of the word grail that you can find anywhere in the world. I can't definitively say that's the case, but it's the oldest one that I'm aware of that can be traced back 4,000, 5,000 years ago. And their science that's there is basically alchemy of some sort. And of course, alchemy comes from Kemet, which is another name for Egypt. So you're starting to see how you've got Egypt, you've got Samaria, you've got all these other traditions that are coming inside of it that are there. You got the Tuatha De Danann, you got the Vedic tradition, you've got so many other things that are happening, people I haven't even mentioned that are a part of this and whatnot. And it is important to understand that there are other things that are happening, such as Hermeticism that's inside of it. And alchemy is a subset of Hermeticism that's going on inside of these stories and whatnot. And the more I study it, the more it becomes clear that the Arthurian tradition and the Grail tradition, that they all, that it seems to have all the stuff that's ever entered into Western mystery school tradition, Western thought. And it's quite insane just how many connections that there are to these various different things. You're going to see later on that there's stuff that has to do with the Scythians and whatnot, and um, they're another group of people that are important. You got the Narts and the Ossetians and the Alans and the Sarmatians that are all part of this as well. So the question becomes then, what really is the Grail? Well, if it has all these connections to all these other things, and we see it popping up in various different forms, and Chrétien de Troyes says it's just a Grail, and whatnot, then clearly there's so much more to the story than what we are originally told, which is that it's just some sort of physical object. And we will be exploring all of these various different things on this channel and more for what's going on here. One of the things that I invite you to do is to kind of choose the parts that you're interested in. There will be playlists that I make. That'll be seasons, as I'm going to be calling them. So you already have season one, that's the initiate's journey. That won't be changing pretty much too much at all. There'll be maybe some additions that I make at some point. But then you have season two, which is the one that I'm kind of doing right now, which is the Arthurian myth and tradition. But there'll be other things that are going on with it. I've already collaborated with somebody, making it so that way at some point here soon, we're going to be deep diving into certain of the Sumerian tradition stuff with it. So there'll be a playlist for Sumeria, there'll be a playlist for the Templars, there'll be a playlist for, alchemy and whatever else that I'm going to be covering here. And each one's going to be its own playlist, and each one's going to be its own season. And from there, you can explore the aspects of the Grail and the Grail sciences that you find the most compelling, the most interesting to you. And you can go and learn about whatever aspect of it that you want to that's going on there. So, you know, we all have problems in our lives too. And we all want to have solves with it. And one of the things that's about the Grail in and of itself is to have this transformative aspect of things with it. Because whenever the various different knights that come across and King Arthur originally, whenever they come across the Grail, they are transformed by it. They make it so that way they themselves become better people from it. And they have this gnosis that comes to them and a spiritual illumination and coming face to face with the divine and understanding the divine plan, basically, if you will. Um, almost like understanding of enlightenment, like you would find in Hinduism or Buddhism. And because of that, I want to make sure that everybody can help deal with their problems and understand these stories better and how they can actually help like fix things for us and whatnot when you understand the deeper meanings behind that. Everybody has wounds that they have to deal with, just like the wounded king and going on the Grail quest to begin with. The point is that we all have to take a Grail quest. We all have to go and make it so that way we better some part of ourselves with it. It could be that you're struggling with some sort of addiction that you have to something with it. It could be your smartphone, it could be pornography, it could be, where you're just spending too much time, doing something that's not necessarily beneficial to you, or even things that are beneficial to you, but you're neglecting some other portion of your life. You could also have it to where you have an anger issue that you need to resolve and whatnot. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's a metaphor for going after these difficult to see parts of ourselves and making that happen. So if you would like to learn more about this particular portion of things and how the Wounded King as a figure can um, go and make this better for us, I invite you to click the video that's on the screen right now, which is having to do with the Wounded King, and make it so that way you can start to explore some of the deeper layers of these stories for yourself. I want to thank everybody for your time and whatnot, and if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Take care.